All right, we are beginning World War I, and this is more exciting fill-in-the-blank notes by Mrs. Caltagirone. All right, I'll try to make them as interesting as possible. It's very important that you take these notes because the tests that you will be taking, the questions are always straight from these notes. So it's important that you watch the crash courses and that you get all the information that you can. But know that it's very important that you do the fill-in-the-blank notes and you study those because everything that we cover is in those notes and everything that you need to know for the test, all of the TEKs are in those notes. All right. Our first section, we will have 3 sections this time. And the first section is the main causes of World War I in Europe. Okay. The main causes is actually an acronym, MAIN. Unfortunately, our PowerPoint or our slides are not in alphabetical order, but I will talk to you about them as we go through, okay? Nationalism, which is the N in main, that is one of the main causes. Each country wanted to protect its own nation, their own interest, and that led to rivalries between states, and I don't mean states like Texas and Oklahoma. When we talk about states, we're in wars, and in other, we're actually talking about each individual country. And so the rivalries developed between France and Germany, Russia and Austria-Hungary. All right, and so if you take a look at this map here, actually, let me go back. Imperialism. Remember, we talked about that in our last unit as America was gaining territories. Well, that was happening all over the world. And really, the European countries were much more imperialistic than the United States was. And so they were controlling much of Asia and almost all of Africa. They were competing for economic interest and colonial territories. So if you look at this map, you can see here's the key, Great Britain and France and Belgium. And then if you look at Africa, there's hardly any independent countries in the whole, or independent territories in the whole continent of Africa. European countries had colonized almost the whole continent. And they were all competing for the wealth of goods and the wealth of natural resources that were in Africa. All right. Another cause, the A in the main causes, is the alliance system. Other countries joined together with other nations to increase security. So like there would be a pact, say maybe Great Britain formed a pact with Russia and they said, Russia, if another country attacks you, even if we don't have an interest in that, we will come to your defense because you are our partners or you are our allies. It's kind of like on a playground fight. Two students get into a fight and the next thing you know, the whole playground is fighting because one student's friends came to his aid and the other student's friends came to his aid, and the next thing you know, everybody's fighting, even though they don't have any individual interests. They're just defending their friends. That's what happens in the alliance system. The allies were France, Great Britain, Russia, and Serbia. The central powers were Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire. Okay, and you can see here how in the map how it was developed. There were very few neutral nations during this time, but most of the countries had become involved in the alliance system where they agreed to defend each other. Okay, another reason was militarism. Okay, nations wanted to show how strong they were, and you remember we talked about how Theodore Roosevelt sent his Navy around the world, sent the U.S. Navy, so we could show how powerful we were on the seas. Well, nations built up their military and planned for war. Many of the governments were military governments, and so all of the politicians wore military uniforms when they went to meetings, and it was very much like a time of showing how powerful they were, which caused tensions to grow. All right. The spark that started World War I, all of the things that we talked about previously, those were long-term things. Those were things that were leading up to war, and eventually it looked like the world was going to go at war. But the short-term cause, the thing that finally set it off, was the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 by a Slavic assassin with help from Serbians, and that began the war. If you watch the crash course video, you saw many details about this. It's very important to know about that. All right. A new kind of war begins. The world had never seen a war like this, where Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia, France, and Germany then began mobilizing troops and finally declared war on Russia. Well, when Germany declared war on Russia and then moved troops through Belgium, which was a neutral country, Great Britain joined the war because Great Britain was in alliance with Russia. And then they invaded France, but they were halted before they could take, German troops invaded France, but they were halted by the Allies before they could take Paris. Okay, and so here you can see the countries, how they're divided. The pink countries are neutral, but you can see that the Central Powers are most of North Africa and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire. That was all the Central Powers. The Allied powers were France and Great Britain, Italy, which is interesting because Italy was not an ally in World War II, but here they are. Portugal is an ally, but Spain stays neutral. And then, of course, the Russian Empire. Okay. All right, and I don't know why. Oh, I see. So you see all these little things. There's the assassination, and then each little event happens that what we just talked about that caused us to be involved in the war. And finally, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, the United States entered the war. Okay, and we finally brought peace. All right, this is one of the most important things that you need to learn about World War I is new weapons and tactics. Before this war, wars had been fought for centuries the same way. Militaries would line up and face off against each other, and they would shoot until one row fell down and died, and then the next row would line up and shoot. Now we have new weapons. And so we're going to talk about these, and it's very important. These will be on your test, and I'll just about guarantee you that some of these questions are going to be on the STAR test. First thing we're going to talk about is machine guns. Machine guns made it easier to defend positions than to attack, which that created trench warfare. Trench warfare is very important. If you've seen the movie 1918, you know what the soldiers experienced in the trenches. All right. Trench warfare was where both sides dug trenches and mines, and they actually lived in these underground bunkers for months at a time, and the conditions there were horrible. Men sometimes in the rainy season, the soldiers would be wearing their boots for so long in the mud, and their feet would be wet for so long that their feet would actually start rotting. The dead bodies would pile up, and when it rained, the rain would wash the horrible germs and disease through the trenches, and the dead bodies would float right by the soldiers. Of course, that brought rats, and the conditions were just appalling and very horrible. All right, and poison gas. There had been an agreement that nations would not use poison gas in war, but the Central Powers broke that agreement, and they used poison gas. If you've seen the movie War Horse, and I will give extra credit for anyone who watches the movie War Horse and does a report about it and mentions these things that we're talking about, poison gas and tanks, trench warfare. If you can watch that movie and mention those in a report, I will give you extra credit as a major grade for watching War Horse. All right. Another technology was airplanes. If you remember, the Wright brothers just invented the airplane in 1913. And here it is, 1914, 1915, just 10, 12 years later. And now we're using planes in war. One of the most famous facts about World War I is at the beginning, when the soldiers went to war, there were so few means of transportation that most soldiers went to war on horseback. But in the 4 years that they were at war, so much technology developed that going to war on horseback, they were able to come home in airplanes in those short 4 years. Because of airplanes, though, it led to higher casualties and deaths. All right, submarines. Submarines had never been used to this extent in war before. The Germans used U-boats to break up the British naval blockade that sought to starve Germany and Austria-Hungary, but they were unsuccessful in that. Okay, by 1918, the war had become deadlocked. There was a front there, and neither side was advancing. Everybody was in the trenches, and they weren't going forward, and it didn't look like either side was going to be able to win. All right, and that's where we will stop with today's notes.